Welcome to the first lecture in our 7th week of Church History 500, and we're going to be tackling the question or the topic of the rise of Islam. And it may seem a little odd to talk about the rise of Islam in a church history course, but the Islamic world impacted the church to such an extent it's helpful to know a little bit more about who they are and how they interacted with the church. So from this lecture, I expect the student will describe the spread of Islam into Asia, Africa, and Europe. The student will explore Islam's central beliefs. Why was it incompatible with Christianity, or in what ways might it have been? And the student will evaluate the impact Islam had on the development of the church. So any discussion of Islam has to start with the Prophet Muhammad. And the Prophet Muhammad was born somewhere around 570 AD. So after the Council of Nicaea, after Council of Chalcedon, his father died before he was born, so he was raised by his uncle Abu Talib. And we think that Abu Talib might have been a Christian. We do know that he was a merchant who owned a small business, and he was known for his trustworthiness. And at age 25, he married a wealthy widow, Khadijah, and became something of a kept man. So while he was a hard worker, small business owner, now he had free time, which he did not have before. When Muhammad was 40 years old, the age of 40 is very important in Islam because this was the age where the Prophet Muhammad had his first visitation by the angel Jibril, or Gabriel, right? By AD 613, Muhammad was ordered by Jibril to Hira to recite. That's where we get the term the Quran from. And AD 613 was the beginning of a series of recitations, each one a quote-unquote sign from God, or an ayah. Ayah is the name of a verse in the Quran, right? From these visions, Muhammad began to preach a new religion. Perhaps a very old one if you ask a Muslim, but from where we stand, it's very new. Now, Muhammad did preach, as the Jews did, that God is one, and that one must submit to God. That wasn't necessarily new. But he did preach a series of laws that one had to follow in order to be saved. And Muhammad became the prophet through which Allah revealed these laws. This is something Jews and Christians did not preach. Now, Muhammad did teach that Allah had first given his recitations to Moses, but then the Jews corrupted it. Then he gave the recitations to Isa, to Jesus, but the Christians corrupted it. But now Allah was giving his recitations to Muhammad, and he was divinely preserving them. Right? This is why Jews and Christians are referred to as people of the book in the Quran. Right? In the beginning, Muhammad's preaching won him very few converts, but he did earn a significant opposition from the local polytheists in Mecca. So in AD 622, Muhammad fled to Yathrib, right? And he took his small band of followers to Yathrib. We know it as Medina. And this event is seen as the central historical event in Islam. This is the date from which Islamic history is dated. And while in Yathrib, Muhammad's message won him a lot more converts than his first time in Mecca. And Muhammad united the Medinan tribes. So in AD 629, Muhammad raised an army of about 10,000 Muslims, marched on Mecca, defeated them largely uncontested, and walked into the Kaaba, this box, the stone box in the center of Mecca that housed all of these polytheistic idols, and cleaned the idols out, right? But later on in that year, in December of AD 629, the Prophet fell ill and died. And by the time of his death, Muhammad had united all of the major tribes in Arabia. And then the first major question hits Islam. Okay, how are we going to handle the succession from Muhammad? And this is where different parties within Islam developed. Because there was a disagreement about how to pick a successor. Some thought that the leadership of Islam should go to Muhammad's next of kin, like his closest male relative, which was his nephew Ali. Others thought it should fall to the closest follower, the eldest and most capable follower. And this became the first and really most fundamental division that persists in Islam today. And the party that thought that succession would run through the male relative is known as the Party of Ali, or the Shia Ali. We call them Shiites today. And the party that thought that succession should run through the most capable and trusted advisor became known as the Sunni Party. And those are two major competing groups within Islam even to this day. It was actually the latter plan that won out, the most trusted and capable advisor, and the first successor to Muhammad, Abu Bakr, love saying his name, Abu Bakr, became the first of the four Rashidun caliphs, or rightly guided ones. So Abu Bakr ruled between 632 and 634. He was a capable military leader that expanded the borders of Islam into the Byzantine Empire and the Sassanid Empire, and then he died of illness. He would be the lucky one. See if you can notice a trend in the next caliphs. The second caliph was Umar, and he ruled the longest from 634 to 644. And he expanded Islam into Egypt and into Syria. But because Islam had been engaged in so many military conquests to expand the borders, a lot of Muhammad's original followers began dying. So these recitations that the Prophet Muhammad would announce to his people, and the people would memorize it, a lot of the people that had committed them to memory, who had heard of the recitations firsthand from Muhammad, they were now dying off. And he realized that there was a need to write down and record these recitations. So Umar sent out a call. If anyone has a saying of the Prophet, write it on a piece of vellum, piece of parchment, a bone, a stone, whatever, mail it in, and we'll collect them all together and publish them. But before this project was completed in 644, Umar was assassinated. And the third caliph was Uthman. Uthman actually ruled longer than Umar did, 644 to 656. And Uthman, being a good successor to Muhammad, expanded the boundaries of Islam across North Africa into modern Libya in the west and into Persia in the east. And it was under Uthman where he finally said, okay, we have enough collected sayings of the Prophet, and there was this organizational warehouse where they collected sayings that sounded alike and said, okay, this is an actual saying of the Prophet. Maybe some sayings only had one or two attestations were not included in the Quran. So we can see the process of Quranic compilation was a lot more arbitrary than the Christian canon. But it was under Uthman that the Quran was finally collected and published. And in 656, Uthman was assassinated, right? So the fourth caliph, it finally got down to Ali, the Prophet's nephew, that a lot of the Islamic world thought should have been the successor to Muhammad. He was finally the most senior, most trusted advisor. And Ali inherited something of a mess because the first three caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, had pushed the borders of Islam up into the Byzantine Empire, out into Persia, across North Africa, and Ali inherited this massive territory that was very hard to administer. And because it was hard to administer, his rule was somewhat weak. And he had a rival, a guy named Muawiyah. Muawiyah sought to avenge the assassination of Uthman. So he raised an army and attacked Ali, starting the first civil war in Islam. So Ali tried to do something very wise. He negotiated with Muawiyah, hey, if you stop the war, I'll make sure that when I die, you are the next caliph chosen. And that negotiation backfired on Ali, because we have another split within Islam. There are some followers of Ali that thought that Ali should have never compromised with Muawiyah. He should have never extended the olive branch. That he was watering down true Islam. And it formed a third party within Islam, the Kharijites. They were the hardliners. When Ali died, I believe he was assassinated. His son Hassan took over until his abdication in 669. Ali did not want any part of this growing administrative mess. So Muawiyah actually bought him off, paid him to step down. And Hassan's brother Hussein was going to succeed to the caliphate, and Muawiyah tried to buy him off, but Hussein would not be bought off. So Muawiyah pursued him, and Muawiyah finally caught up to him and beheaded him in what is now Karbala, Iraq. And there's a grand mosque built on this site, the Imam Hussein Mosque. So here we see this tragic injustice that fuels the rivalry between the Shia Ali, the Shiites, those who think that Ali and his sons should be the rightful leaders of Islam, and the Sunnis, those who think that the most senior, capable, trusted advisor, which Muawiyah thinks is him, should take over Islam. This became one of these unforgivable sins, and the Sunnis and Shias are still disagreeing over things. I'm not so sure that they are actively still disagreeing over the assassination of Hussein, but I do know the Sunnis still revere the Imam Hussein Mosque. So it is not forgotten. So finally, in 661, Muawiyah succeeded to the leadership of Islam, and he started what's called the Umayyad dynasty. And the Umayyad dynasty stretches from AD 661 to 750, so long after the death of Muawiyah. And the Umayyad dynasty continued to expand the borders of Islam, expanded across North Africa all the way to the Atlantic, and across Persia to the border with India. The way in which the Umayyads expanded is somewhat fascinating. There was a lot of battles fought and a lot of lives lost, but the Umayyads also had another club in their bag, so to speak. They would march their army to the border of a major city and say, hey look, we're a big army who has conquered everyone up to you, and we don't want to fight and die, you don't want to fight and die, right? So how about you voluntarily submit to us? And here's what you get in return. If you're a Christian city, you can keep being a Christian city. You can elect your own Christian leaders. You can worship in your Christian churches. You know that substantial tax, somewhere around 15-ish% that you're paying to Constantinople for being in the Byzantine Empire? Guess what? Your taxes will go down to 4%. You get to pay the dhimmi tax, like the non-Muslim tax. And you get to keep being Christian, and we're just going to set up camp around here, and we're going to look after you. And anything that we do in this camp outside, you guys can benefit from. That sounds better than war, right? And there were a number of cities that took them up on that. And what the Umayyads did is they allowed a measure of autonomy in the city, and outside the city they would build the best schools and the best hospitals and the best infrastructure, and this city on the outside would grow. People from the original city would start to go into this administrative city for school and health reasons and all that, and it would grow, and it just, after a generation or so, swallowed up the original city. So Islam, while it does have a long military history, and I don't want to take away from that, it's probably not accurate to say that it was spread purely by the sword. They did have another club in their bag. Honestly, I'm not really sure what percentage of Islam was spread by violence and what percentage was spread by this other, frankly, quite ingenious method, but it was there. Around 750, AD 750, the Umayyad dynasty gave way to the Abbasid dynasty. And the Abbasid dynasty would stretch from 750 to 1258, and it's known as the Golden Age of Islam. It was capitaled in Baghdad. And it's during this period where Islam developed significant scientific advances. They developed alchemy, chemistry. Much to the dismay of high schoolers across our nation, the Abbasids developed algebra, right? Baghdad invented something amazing, so amazing. Like any great invention in this world is one of those things where you read about it for the first time and you realize that's going to make millions of dollars, and that's something I should have thought of, right? Islam invented something that I can't believe they didn't really have before then, and that's hospitals. Now, the medieval period, Romans, Greeks, they did have hospitals, but what the Muslims did that was so genius is they would have different wings of these hospitals, and they would group the patients by symptoms. Oh, people are throwing up blood. Let's put all those people over here. And oh, some people have boils. Let's put them all over there. They didn't have germ theory yet, but they recognized that you don't want to cross-contaminate. That's one of those ideas that the Greeks are going, oh man, we should have thought of that one, right? We did have an Islamic thinker, Ibn Sina, which we know in the West as Avicenna, that would compile these compendiums of medicine, these collections of experimental methods of treatment and what works, and presumably he left out the ones that didn't work, right? But we do have this compilation of scientific literature. We have, during the Abbasid period, the advent of Islamic literature, 1001 Arabian Nights. We have Islamic philosophy. The Islamic world was the world that preserved Aristotle. We have this in Ireland too, but the Islamic world took Aristotle to heart and wrote commentaries on Aristotle. So when the Crusades came and captured a whole bunch of books in the Islamic world, the medieval world kind of rediscovered Aristotle. All right, let's talk about Islamic expansion. How far they were able to stretch across the known world. During the time of Muhammad, he was able to unite the tribes in the Arabian Peninsula. And after the Prophet Muhammad, Islam expanded first into the Byzantine Empire, into North Africa during the Umayyad dynasty. They swept across North Africa, across the Straits of Gibraltar, and actually up into the Iberian Peninsula, into Spain. In the other direction, eastward, Islam expanded into Central Asia. And they reached the border with China. Central Asia is expansive. It is not empty, but it is not populated. So that is quite a feat to stretch from the Arabian Peninsula all the way to China. In AD 751, Muslim armies fought the Battle of Talas, and they won. But China proved to be so far away, the Islamic Empire was so large, they could never impose any administrative rule in China. In Western Europe, Muslims known as Moors had taken over a good chunk of the Iberian Peninsula, crossed the Pyrenees into France, and made it all the way to Tours before Charles the Hammer Martel, stopped the Islamic advance at the Battle of Tours in AD 732. After the Battle of Tours, Catholic European powers embarked on what we call the Reconquista, the reconquest of Europe from the Muslims. And that was not complete until 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella. And that is what allowed Columbus to set sail for India, for the New World. In Eastern Europe, we had the Ottoman Turks pushing up into Central Europe, and they got to the gates of Vienna before they were turned back in 1683. So we see the Islamic Empire stretching from the border with China across a good swath of Asia, across North Africa, into Europe from the west, and into Europe from the east. And really the only part of Europe that was not under Muslim control was a half, 2/3 of France and most of Germany, but the Muslims had kind of squeezed in there. And that is what makes teaching a church history, a global church history course, complicated. Because when the Islamic world took over that whole swath, Central Asia, North Africa, it created something of an Islamic curtain. I'm sure someone else has invented that term. If not, I got dibs on the copyright. This Islamic curtain that prevented Christian, not just goods and services, but Christian ideas from traveling those Silk Roads, traveling those African roads. Christians could no longer enter, well, to be perfectly honest, for a while they could enter the Holy Land, they could enter North Africa, but in a second-class status. And eventually the Muslims kind of shut down that access. So whatever Christianity had spawned in China could not get any support from Syria, Palestine, support from Constantinople or Rome. So it was pretty much cut off. And Christianity in sub-Saharan Africa was pretty much cut off by the Muslims controlling North Africa. So we do have the penning in of Christianity into Europe by Islam, which is why it's important for us to talk about it in a church history course. Let's conclude by talking a little bit about what Muslims believe and how Muslims behaved, so we know how compatible or incompatible those ideas are with Christianity. There are some basic tenets of Islam, and in Shiite 12-verse theology, notice that there are groups within Islam, right? 12-verse theology, they believe in Tawheed, God is one. And this is where we get a little bit of an Islamic fiction here, because the Muslims I know talk about how divided Christianity is and how unified Islam is. They tell me there is one sun, there is one earth, there is one Islam, there is one Allah. Yeah, okay, but we've already seen that there are factions within Islam, Sunnis and Shia, Kharijites, Sufis. There are, I am going to make a guess, a comparable number of divisions within Islam that we have in Christianity. So when I talk about Shiite 12-verse theology, I am talking about one of those subsects within Islam. They believe in the principle of adl, divine justice. Allah will always do what is right, or more accurately, whatever Allah does is right, right? Nubuwah, prophethood. And yes, this refers to the Prophet Muhammad, but he's known as the last prophet. Moses and Isa, Jesus, were also prophets. Imama, succession, the relatives of the prophets. So depending if because this is Shiite theology, the leaders would be considered the relatives of the prophet. They believed in Mi'ad, Judgment Day, that everyone's works will be judged good or bad, right? Within all of Islam, you have the 5 pillars, and these are more familiar to us. The Shahada, the confession. If you recite the confession to another Muslim, that's what officially makes you a Muslim. La ilaha illallahu Muhammadun Rasulullah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. if I was to speak that in the presence of a Muslim, I would be considered Muslim. I don't know if it works if any Muslims watch this video. I would suspect not. So the Shahada is the first pillar. Second pillar is Salah, the prayers. And Muslims are famous for praying 5 times a day. And there is a ritualistic rite that they go through with each of these 5 prayers: dawn, noon, afternoon, evening, and night. Originally, there were 6 or 7, and Muslims had to wake up in the middle of the night. Those proved to be very unpopular and eventually dropped out of Islam. Shahada, Salah, Zakat, almsgiving. This is what is enticing to some Christians. Standard in Christianity is usually 10%, a tithe. In Islam, it's 2.5%. And this is not given to your local mosque. This is given to an Islamic charity. And a lot of times this is used to fund people's Hajj, which we'll get to in a second. Now, if you live in an Islamic country or an Islamic controlled city and you are not Muslim, that was okay, but you had to pay an extra tax, the dhimmi tax. Non-Muslims paid 4%, Muslims paid 2.5%. Saum, fasting. This was during the month of Ramadan, and a lot of Christians are amazed. Wow, you fast 30 days, or however long a lunar month is there. Yeah, it's more days than a Christian typically fasts, but the fasting is from sunup to sundown. So they can feast the other times. Some Muslims take the idea of fasting so far they will not smoke, like they will not swallow, like nothing goes down the esophagus, the windpipe during that time. But not all Muslims, they observe it like that. So interesting, when Christians are amazed at Muslims that they would go 30 days, when a Muslim finds out about a Christian fasting 24 hours a day for 3 days, Muslims are amazed at that. So it's just different ways to approach it. The traditional breaking of the break fast is on Eid al-Fitr, the night of power. So the Eid is becoming a more popular holiday to celebrate in America. So when you hear Eid, it's Eid al-Fitr. So we got the Shahada, Salah, Zakat, Saum, and Hajj. Hajj is the pilgrimage. And this is where every good Muslim at one point in their life has to go to Mecca. And there's a number of rituals, circumambulating the Kaaba, throwing stones at Satan, all sorts of things. In order for it to be a Hajj, it has to be done during the month of Hajj, right? And a lot of people's 2.5% given to charities can be used to fund people's Hajj trips that they couldn't afford on their own. You can still go to Mecca and Medina outside of the month of Hajj, but this is called an Umrah, and it technically counts, but it's not as good, right? Because you're not doing it with every other Muslim. And I got to say, some of the videos out there of these rituals around the Kaaba and such, they, depending on your point of view, are either impressive, I think they are impressive, or crazy, right? But we have to be careful there, because there's a lot of things Christians do that Muslims would think is crazy. So there are a number of other beliefs in Islam. Isa, Jesus, is described in the Quran as the sinless prophet. One that drives me nuts is the Quran is unquestionable. As a Christian, you know, we've done a lecture on the canonicity of the New Testament, the criteria, and I try and engage Muslims about this. They're not even allowed to go down that road, right? Muslims do have something called dawah, evangelism, and this is what fueled a lot of their expansion across North Africa under the Umayyads. It's not all violence and force. There is an evangelistic impulse there. Now, as Muslims swept across this large area of Africa, of Asia, even into Europe, they embarked on a program of Arabization Arabization. There it is. Arabization. And one major component to that was iconoclasm. And this makes the news from time to time now, that in Islam, it is forbidden to make any idols. It's forbidden to make any representations of God or Muhammad. And this stems from Muhammad's story. When he brought his army into Mecca and cleared out all the idols in the Kaaba, it was this symbol that any visual representation of the divine is inappropriate. It is a monotheistic religion. Tawheed, one God. The greatest sin you can commit in Islam is assigning companions to the Prophet, called shirk, right? As Christians, because we're Trinitarian, we are guilty of shirk, right? So Islam rejects all representational art concerning the divine. So what they did is they developed a unique type of Arab calligraphy, so they can make beautiful pictures of, let's say, birds. But if you look closely, those are Arabic letters, and they're usually verses, ayats from the Quran. So it's not representational. It is word-driven. And this iconoclastic impulse is followed more closely by the Sunnis than the Shias. And when Christianity rubbed up against Islam, especially in the Byzantine Empire, it sparked a controversy within Christianity whether or not it is proper to have visual representations of the divine in Christianity. Can we draw pictures of Jesus? Right? And that was a big deal, especially in the Eastern Church, because we had these icons. And the borderlands in between the Islamic and the Christian world, Christians started to doubt whether or not Christians should make representational art when it comes to the divine. And eventually, and we haven't really, this is in the Gonzalez text, we haven't really talked about it much in the lectures, but Christianity did say, okay, yes, it is okay to have representational art as long as we don't worship that art. We can venerate that art, but we should not worship it. And that distinction held up through the Reformation. And interestingly, after the Reformation, the Presbyterian divines at the Westminster Assembly actually adopted an iconoclastic posture, where Presbyterians, or at least those who follow the Westminster Confession, do not think it is appropriate to allow representational art, especially of Christ, right? And that is in the Larger Catechism, question 109, if you're looking for it. And to make my Presbyterian friends sad, I do have a hard time with this a little bit, because I think that the Incarnation should change a little bit of our approach to representational art. I can't help but wonder whether or not those Westminster divines were pushing back against Catholicism and Anglo-Catholicism. But I don't think it's sinful if you don't think it's appropriate to have images of Christ. And this sparks a lot of debates over whether we can watch The Chosen and things like that. But at least we see some of the fault lines between Christianity and Islam, and how the presence of Islam was not just a geographic barrier to the rest of the world, but sparked theological controversy within the church as well. I appreciate your patience. Thank you.